he's been a wonderful member in our group, and so Peter, come on up and share what you have.
Thank you, Brad. It's nice to be here. So today I wanted to talk about Bible study. It's something I enjoy a lot. I pastor a small church. Now it's just my family. It's something I pay a lot of attention to, try to get things right and protect my children from incorrect teachings of grace mixed with law. So being attentive to Bible study helps me to remove that leaven that so often accompanies that lump of doctrine. So if it's okay with you guys, I'd like to divide this talk into two parts. One, I'd like to talk about a book by John MacArthur and just kind of guide us along, following his arguments and seeing if his arguments are good. And then the second part, to sort of build on Bible study. Does it sound reasonable? So here's Romans 6:15. It says, "What then shall we sin, because we are not under law, but under grace?" And MacArthur characterizes this. He says, Paul's hypothetical questioner asks, does grace free us to sin at will? So my question is, did MacArthur characterize Paul's question correctly?
I suggest not.
Okay. Why not?
He's talking about an exercise of a non-guided freedom, it seems like, that where I think Paul is talking about transformation of a way of thinking, and in that new thinking, what is the fruit of that new thinking? And I think MacArthur doesn't notice the fruit of that new thinking. He's just thinking that now that God has forgiven you, why not just sort of live like a pagan? Rather than, now that God has forgiven you, somehow that transforms and has an effect.
Okay.
That's what I would see.
Okay. Any other perspectives about, does anyone see an incompatibility with MacArthur's characterization of the question?
Does it flow in context with that chapter?
The answer, this is Romans 6:15, and Paul, essentially, this is the only place in the New Testament where a speaker asks a question, a rhetorical question, which he does in Romans 6:1, and then he repeats it, half a chapter later. Very unique. And so my question is MacArthur's characterization fair? Is there a difference here between what MacArthur says this guy's asking and what is being asked?
There's no sense of authority in MacArthur's question.
Okay.
And I think there's a sense of authority in the Bible verse.
Okay. Okay, so Paul, the Romans 6:15 is translated with the shall. Shall we sin? How about let's consider that part? Is MacArthur's characterization, is that true to the shall part, or does it ask another question?
Seems to me like, if I may say, presenting probably the other perspective, it seems to me like they're pretty similar.
Okay.
MacArthur's question.
Okay.
Even though they're worded differently.
Okay.
The word shall conveys the right thing to do.
Yes.
Is it the right thing to do to sin because we're not under law but under grace?
Yes.
At least in the old days when I was a kid, shall meant the bright thing.
Yeah. And does MacArthur convey the shall there? Or does he? Okay, what I suggest is MacArthur's question is essentially asking, can we sin? Not what can we. The real question is, what shall we do? And it seems to me that MacArthur is asking, can we do something? Am I misinterpreting, or do you think I've correctly characterized MacArthur here? So I'm saying Paul is asking a shall question, and MacArthur is characterizing it as a can question.
Seems like that. Does.
Okay. No, if there's no dissenters, then I will continue. So I think MacArthur mischaracterizes the question. It comes from page 67 of his book, Freedom from Sin. I think Paul already answered the can question in the previous chapter. He said, through Adam, sin came to all men. But where sin abounded, grace abounded all the more. I think Paul already would say, look, I already answered the can question in Romans 5. And the answer is, you can do evil that grace may increase. If you cannot do evil that grace may increase, then grace is no longer grace. And we're back under Moses. So I contend that MacArthur mischaracterizes the question, and then he answers it incorrectly. He answers the can question incorrectly. He says, and it's in the strongest terms, absolutely not, ridiculous, impossible. Impossible, John MacArthur tells us, that you can do evil that grace may increase. And he also has a program called Grace to You. Moreover, MacArthur says, to even ask a question like that would cast a serious doubt on the questioner's search for truth. And this is the only question in the whole New Testament, rhetorical question, that's asked twice. It seems to me that Paul appreciates the question. He wants to answer it honestly. Paul is saying, it is for freedom that Christ has set you free. Please ask your questions. And MacArthur is saying a different story. He's saying, look, if you want to ask a question like that, I really doubt that you're searching for the truth. Very different response I see in MacArthur and Paul. And then on page 56, which comes about 12 pages earlier, MacArthur says, redemption renews the soul. That's not correct. We're not renewed. We have death and new life. And MacArthur's got the wrong paradigm. But let's just continue. Redemption renews the soul. Man's new nature. MacArthur likes this word. I have to stop every 3 words here, unfortunately. MacArthur likes to describe conversion as having a new nature. Paul talks about that we died with Christ. Paul likes to say we got a new nature with Christ. It's a different message from my perspective. Man's new nature is the redeemed portion of believers. Man's new nature is holy, pure, destined for heaven. Okay, so if one believed this, that man's new nature is holy, pure, and destined for heaven, would it follow that you could do bad things that grace might increase?
Seems hard to reason that.
If something is destined for heaven, then it would seem to me that it's not jeopardized by something like behavior, by works. And what I'm getting at is in page 56, it seems to me that MacArthur is promoting the eternal security of the believer. And I think MacArthur would say, hey, I teach eternal security. Yet, I believe he betrays that with the answer to his question. He says, impossible, absolutely not, that you could sin, you could do evil things, that grace may increase. And so, what does MacArthur teach? Does he teach eternal security? I would say, yeah, he teaches that. He teaches that you can lose your salvation. It's possible to sin, that grace may increase. It's possible to do evil. It's troubling. Page 58, MacArthur, this is a quote, key factors in living the Christian life are to obey God and deny temptation. It is invalid to say, let go and let God. Or, I am to do nothing and God will do it all. In contrast, Paul says, knowing that Christ, having been raised from the dead, is never to die again, death no longer is master over him. For the death that he died to sin once for all. But the life that he lives to God. And even so, two of the most powerful words in the New Testament. Even so, as Jesus has a new life, one where death no longer is master over him, even so, consider yourselves to have this new life, and to be dead to sin, but alive to God in Christ Jesus. The main verb here is consider yourself to be dead to sin. But MacArthur says, let go and let God. That's invalid. Paul's not exactly saying, let go and let God, but he's saying something very similar to that. He's saying, reckon Jesus' new life as your own new life. Rest in that. Consider. That's the verb. MacArthur likes something much more than considering. I think considering, he's kind of criticizing as nothing. Let go and let God. It's just considering, and he's saying, that's nothing. God will do it all. I'm troubled at what MacArthur is saying. Elsewhere in this book, MacArthur picks a bone with the King James translation of this Greek word cardigeo in Romans 6:6. Romans 6:6 says that, knowing this, that our old self was crucified with him, that our body of sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin. And he says cardigeo doesn't mean destroy. The New American Standard translates done away with. King James translates this verb as destroy. He says that's wrong because that would mean the believer's sin nature has been eradicated, and this is known as the doctrine of perfectionism. If you want to criticize something, you kind of just put an ISM at the end of it and stigmatize it. You thereby stigmatize it, and that's how you can win an argument sometimes. And curiously, the author of Hebrews says, for by one offering he has perfected for all time those who are sanctified. He says perfected. And it's that same word that Jesus is the author and perfecter of our faith in Hebrews 12:2. So why can he say that this is known as the doctrine of the imputed righteousness of Christ? Christ is perfect. We are perfect. We have Christ's life. Christ's life is perfect. We have a perfect life. It's best if we walk in it. But let's say we have a perfect life, and that's what the Bible teaches. Continuing about this translational bone to pick that MacArthur has with the King James, it says, okay, well, what this word really means, cardigeo, is to render inoperative or invalid. And then he goes and discusses the context. He shows 4 instances of cardigeo used in Romans, okay, or other instances other than Romans 6:6. And he says, hey, it means, in these cases, it means without effect. So he first says, well, cartageo means to render inoperative or invalid or without effect. So what's the difference if something is, at least the functional difference, if something is destroyed or if it's without effect? If your body of sin is destroyed or if that body of sin is of none effect, it seems, why is he making a fuss here? But curiously, you turn the page and he says, well, the believer's body of sin has been deprived of its controlling power. So he's further walking away from even his previous definitions. He does this semantic layer study. We'll talk about semantic layer studies. Often errors come in by people fixating on semantic layer studies. Semantic layer is a good, very legitimate layer, but we need the other layers to cooperate with what's going on here. And so he builds this semantic bridge, and he says, okay, it's operative or invalid without effect, and then it's been deprived of its controlling power. So what MacArthur is saying here is that, well, under Moses, it controlled you. Before Christ, you had no choice but to sin, but now it's been deprived of its controlling power. And then he says, many pages later, you're noticing a trend here. On one page he says something, and 12 pages later he says something different. And again, in line with this trend, he says, we must battle all our lives to be holy, because as long as we remain encased in flesh, there will be a lifetime of constant struggle. So we've moved from destroyed in the King James to some render inoperative or invalid without effect, all the way to, look, this thing is active, this is a big pain, and you got to work hard to fight against it. Basically on page 59 he renounces these other words that he says on page 35. Curiously, if you look at the context, that Paul used the word death or died or dies 10 times in the 4 verses after 6:6 and the 5 verses after 6:6 and the 4 verses before. It's a total of 10 times. Get the idea that sin is dead. But suddenly, MacArthur resurrects aliveness to sin. And that, hey buddy, it's a constant struggle. MacArthur doesn't tell us that the context is full of this word death. And he builds a semantic bridge to nowhere, which he then divorces on page 59. And it's a divorce from the context, where we're talking about death. If death is anything, marks a qualitative change. There's a freedom found in death. He who has died is free from sin. Romans 6:7.
It's MacArthur typical of a way of thinking, and that's why you're using him as an example.
Yes.
It's very clear.
Yes. I'm using us as an example to show what's involved with grace. Grace is very precious, very beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing. And it's only in the Christian faith, okay? But grace, however beautiful and wonderful, it's also fragile. Paul tells us a little bit of leaven leavens the whole lump. We have to take care that we don't betray grace hermeneutically, even in our behavior. I think that's Paul's point. Let's not betray grace in our behavior. Shall we sin? That grace may increase, may decrease. How shall we who died to still walk in these bad behaviors? We would make ourselves a kingdom divided against ourselves. That's Paul's argument. John MacArthur's argument is quite different. We can't do that. That would be impossible. I was looking at this coming up here. So one more point I want to share. And it has to do with this word redemption that I talked about earlier. The Christian paradigm is death and new life. And there's a resting in death. He who has died is freed from sin. There's a resting in that. We have died with Christ. We are free from sin. Don't try to make yourself free from sin as if it was not a gift already given to you by Christ. It is not of faith to ignore what you've been given and try to obtain what you've been given on your own. You cannot obtain freedom from sin by your resolve, by your lifetime constant struggle. That's not how you obtain freedom from sin. So there is a fundamental incompatible paradigm between rehabilitationism, humanism, and death and new life of the Christian faith. The rehabilitationism says that I'm not the man I was 5 years ago. I'm a better guy today. And I'll tell you what, I'm better than a lot of these schmucks out here on the street. That's rehabilitationism. And death and new life says, look, God was never really interested in the life of Peter Dealey. Peter Dealey was born a loser. And God did him the greatest favor in getting rid of his life. And he gave him a new life. God is very pleased in the life of his son. God does not rehabilitate people like Peter Dealey. He ends their life, gives them a new life. I want to be a good father and a good husband, but there's two ways to go about doing that. One way is to work within the context of Peter Dealey and rehabilitate that old bag of bones. No good bag of bones. Another way to go about it is to say, consider him dead. Kind of let go and let God. Consider him dead to sin, but alive to God in Christ Jesus. It's none of Peter Dealey involved here. It's all of Christ. I want to walk in that life I've been given, and that beautiful gift that God gave me. I think it's probably a good idea if I drive the car that God gave me. Get in there, turn it on, take it for a spin around the block maybe every now and then. That'd be a good idea. So hopefully this is motivating us to be attentive to just speaking coherently and not have double speak in our talk, number one. Number two, to interpret the Bible correctly. And number three, we want to give some how-tos about how to study the Bible. I want to turn a corner and focus on Pauline epistles primarily, studying them. I think I talked a little bit about Hebrews here, which is too good to resist. So first I want to say that the gospel is offensive. It's offensive to say righteousness comes to the man who does not work. That's all human cultures teach humanism. Humanism teaches, I'm a better man than I was 5 years ago, better than some of these schmucks out here. May not be better than all of them, better than some of them, right? Look, God's not interested in that. That's not going to enable us to get close to a holy God. In Paul's true message, it's a significant departure of the forgiveness under Moses. It has an air of scandal and offense to it. Behold, I lay in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and whoever believes in him will not be disappointed. Jesus is that rock of offense. And teaching something that's offensive, you need good people skills, usually. It's helpful. So,